Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me today. Make sure you are following and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com. There, you can sign up for the newsletter, check out the show notes, and share this episode with your family and friends. There's a lot going on, obviously. We have the 45th and 47th president of these United States of America who was just inaugurated. And this week marks a truly historic moment in American history. It's something where the long national nightmare of the Biden administration is over. And what Trump did was something that's only happened once, right? He's served 2 non-consecutive terms. The last time that's happened was Grover Cleveland, when he became the 22nd and 24th president in the late 19th century. So it's been a while since we've seen something like this, since we've witnessed a president return to the White House to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. But this isn't just another inauguration. This is a pivotal moment that's actually filled with hope. You have a new opportunity. There's enormous challenges, make no mistake about that. But there is optimism. And President Trump's second term comes at a time when America is in desperate need of leadership, because there's been a leadership void for the last 4 years. We need to revitalize a lot of America on multiple fronts. Over the last 4 years, we've seen an economy that has failed to deliver for the middle class. We've seen younger Americans that increasingly feel the American dream is out of their reach. They're not going to be able to attain it. We've watched chaos unfold on the international world stage. Border security has collapsed, doesn't exist. And then you have the bureaucratic bloat that has stifled innovation, efficiency. You have burdensome regulations. But with President Trump's reelection, there is a sense of optimism that these challenges can be met head on. And I don't want to make it like everything suddenly collapsed under the Biden administration. I mean, that's not necessarily true. The truth is that America has been in decline for the last couple of decades. We've witnessed this. So now we have a president. He returns to office, and he had 4 years to plan what he wanted to do. Something he didn't have the first go around was experience. He now fully understands how Washington works, and more accurately, how it doesn't work. He understands the bureaucratic mindset. He understands the personalities involved. He understands the processes. And he has spent the last 4 years outside of Washington planning, strategizing, and learning. With this knowledge, the Trump administration has the potential to cut through the red tape that is strangling American businesses. He has the opportunity to reestablish stability on the international world stage, which has been remarkably unstable, the likes of which we haven't seen since pre-World War II. He has the opportunity to reestablish control over our borders, secure our borders, and determine who can come into this country and who can't. And just as important, he has the opportunity to implement policies that give the middle class, younger generations, a chance to achieve the American dream, a chance to succeed. I mean, let's be honest. It's why tens of millions of people voted for him. It's why he improved his margins amongst all demographics. But we also can't be naive, because even though we may have optimism, it doesn't erase the challenges ahead. I mean, Joe Biden may have exited the political stage and Democrats may have lost control of the Senate, but that's just one part of it. We are working with the slimmest of majorities in the House of Representatives, and the Senate is a complex legislative body that requires compromise. It requires debate. Certainly, getting things through is not going to be easy. You know, President Trump, he worked more in one day than Joe Biden has worked in 4 years in office, signed over 200 executive orders, But the biggest challenge that Trump's going to face is the swamp, because it remains intact. In fact, over the past 4 years, the swamp has only grown more emboldened despite the election. Now, the election was a slap in the face to the bureaucracy, the federal bureaucracy, and what I am starting to deem the fourth branch of government, because that's what they think they are. The bureaucracy has become an entity unto itself. It operates as if it's independent of the executive branch and untouchable by the legislative branch. And this is not what our founding fathers intended. So there are going to be people embedded within this administration, within the bureaucracy, who see themselves as the self-anointed guardians of democracy. And they are already plotting to undermine President Trump's second term. They already are. Some have openly stated that they're going to refuse to carry out orders that they personally don't like, that they personally disagree with. Even if those orders come from the duly elected president of the United States, they have vowed that they're not going to follow through on them. Some have vowed to leak information to try and sabotage the Trump administration's initiatives. And this is unacceptable in America. When you are a bureaucrat, you do the job, you do the mission. Doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican president. But what are we seeing? We're already seeing that ICE raids are leaking out. We see that they're trying to stymie the administration's agenda. It's not only unacceptable, it's dangerous and potentially criminal. If you are not willing to do the job, then resign. That's it. It's as simple as that. And even if it's not criminal what they're doing, it is clearly unconstitutional. It undermines the intent of the founders. If unelected bureaucrats can defy a president of the United States and openly subvert the will of the American people, our system of government is fundamentally broken, because it was never meant to be this way. And we can't forget the executive branch, where the bureaucracy is housed. It exists. It exists to serve the president, who is elected by the people. And these bureaucrats, they were not elected, nor are they accountable to the public. And so it's even more important that we regain control of the bureaucracy. Their role is to implement policies that Congress has passed. They don't get to act as a shadow government. They don't get to act as the fourth branch of power. Now, as we begin this new chapter in American history, as America returns to the world stage, as leadership is restored, the Trump administration has to prepare to confront the out-of-control bureaucracy head-on. I think that's going to be one of the most important things that the Trump administration does, because if left unchecked, it will continue to grow more powerful. It will continue to erode the authority of not just the presidency, but also Congress, which has long abdicated its oversight responsibilities. You have a bureaucracy that will continue to signify the end of the republic. That's what's going to happen. And that's what the focus of today's episode is going to be. It's going to explore the roots of the bureaucratic overreach and the ways it undermines the principles that this nation was founded on. We're going to look at how Congress and past administrations have allowed this crisis to metastasize within the United States. And we'll discuss what President Trump and Congress must do to reassert its control over the bureaucracy. This is a battle for our republic. And the stakes, they couldn't be higher. But there is reason to have hope. Because with the experience Trump brings in, with the determinations, and a clear understanding of the obstacles that he faces, he knows what he has to do. And he has a unique opportunity to restore balance within the system, to restore accountability to our current government. And let's be honest, he's the only one, the only politician that exists with the personality and the cojones to do just that. We're going to explore the past, present, and future of America's struggle with the bureaucracy and to reclaim our government. We have a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to dive into the critical question. How did we get here? How did we arrive at a point where an unelected bureaucracy, a self-anointed fourth branch of government, wields such enormous power? And a bureaucracy that defies the very principles on which this country was founded. I think that's the critical question we have to examine. And to understand where we went wrong, we have to return to the founding of our nation. You know, this is the biggest problem in the United States because we don't examine what the founding fathers envisioned when they designed the framework of our country, and nor do we teach it anymore. So when you examine this, it's clear that the current state of affairs was never part of the plan. The founders never wanted and even warned about a bloated, unaccountable bureaucracy. They warned about a bureaucracy that operates with near independence and what it would mean for the United States. And the founders were concerned. They understood the dangers of centralized power. They seen firsthand what tyranny looks like. They saw it under British rule, and they worked tirelessly to create a government that would prevent any one person, any one group, or any one institution from wielding unchecked authority. You know, James Madison is considered the father of the Constitution. And he articulated this so well in Federalist number 51. And everyone needs to start reading the Federalist Papers to get back to the intent of the system. And Madison writes, quote, "Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The interest of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place." Here, Madison is arguing for a system of checks and balances, a system, a government in which each branch would have its own powers and serve as a check on the other branches to ensure that no single branch or group could dominate the political system. But what we're seeing today is a breakdown of that balance, as the bureaucracy acts as if it exists above the executive branch, the legislative branch, and beyond congressional oversight. They believe they're immune to the judiciary. And it's all because the bureaucrats believe we exist to serve them. Now, the founders also emphasized the importance of limited government, and this is why limited government is so important. It's why you just don't go and expand government powers just to do it. We have to limit the scope of federal authority. In Article 1, we see the difficulty that the founders made to put a law through Congress. It's a bicameral legislative body, and it's going to be a deliberative body. One where getting things through is going to be difficult because the intent was debate, not just to pass law after law after law after law, not just to have government intervention within our society. Only when the debate is exhausted and the legislative body feels there's no other way, that's the only time. When we look at Article 2, it explicitly vests executive power in the President of the United States. And the framers were clear that the executive branch would be led by one individual, not a committee, not a group of unelected officials, not an unchecked administrative state, but one person who would be elected by the people and would be accountable to the people. Alexander Hamilton in Federalist number 70 argued that the single executives is important because it ensures decision, activity, and make sure that a strong and accountable presidency is essential for effective governance. Yet today, we see a bureaucracy that operates as if it's independent of the executive branch, as if independent of the president. Just look at the last 4 years. You've had an absent president. The bureaucrats were running everything, and they obstruct. They defy whatever they don't like. This is unacceptable in the American system. You know, and listen, again, I always bring up the founders because they were profound in their warnings, including, you know, someone like George Washington, America's first president. When he left office, he warned that it is important that the habits of a thinking and a free country should inspire caution in those entrusted with its administration to confine themselves within their respective constitutional spheres. And that's not what's happening today. Washington, he understood the importance of respecting the boundaries, especially when it comes to power, something that today's bureaucrats are clueless about. They've forgotten it entirely. You know, the Constitutional Convention in 1787 was a pivotal moment. Extensive debates on all different topics about how the to structure the executive branch and the legislative branch. You have delegates like Hamilton that argued for a strong centralized authority. You had others like George Mason that feared when you centralize authority, it creates a system that's going to lead to tyranny. And so they compromised. They reached a compromise, and it was a compromise where the presidency would be empowered to lead the United States, but be constrained by the system of checks and balances. Nowhere in their deliberations do we see support for a sprawling administrative state that acts as if it's independent of all the branches of government, that acts as if it's independent of the will of the people and believes that they are the masters of the people. And you have Thomas Jefferson, who frequently warned about the dangers of centralized power. In a letter to Edward Carrington in 1788, he explained that the natural progression of things is for liberty to yield and government to gain power. That's just the natural state of what happens. Governments naturally get bigger and bigger and bigger, ultimately till they become tyrannical. And that's why Jefferson warned about this, and his warnings are relevant today, because that's exactly what we have. And we, the people, are partly to blame. The bureaucracy, once a tool of the executive branch that just executed the laws of the land, has morphed into its own center of power. And it's unelected bureaucrats. They create regulations, interpret legislation, enforce policies without any accountability. And this growth of government was precisely what Jefferson feared. That government is gaining ground at the expense of our liberties. And we are the ones that allowed it to happen, because anytime something goes wrong, what do? Well, we look to the government to solve the problems. And that's the issue. Rather than try and solve it ourselves or solve it at the local and state level, we have an entire generation of Americans who were never educated on the concept of federalism, who don't understand why limited government is essential, who never learned about the warnings of centralized power. And all we need is history to be our guide, because history has shown what happens, but we failed to heed the warnings of history. The vital principles that the Founding Fathers laid out is something that we can't ignore, including accountability, a government of laws and not of men, as John Adams so eloquently stated. The intent was clear. No one, regardless of their position, is above the law, and every public servant must answer to the people. Now, I know Biden just pardoned everyone, including his family members, said he wasn't going to do it. He even pardoned Fauci, which is actually a disgrace. But we are operating in a gray area where accountability is scarce. And all you have to do is look at the last 2 decades, the abuses of power, the lawfare, the constant leaks of classified information, the refusal to follow and implement lawful orders because they go against the bureaucrats' political ideology. This should not be happening in the United States, nor should it be tolerated. It should not be accepted as the norm. You cannot have a bureaucracy that creates policies through administrative decree. You need a legislative body. You need a strong executive that takes control, because the principles of a Republican form of government have been undermined throughout the years. And perhaps the most poignant warning comes from Benjamin Franklin, when he was asked, "What kind of government have you given us?" He responded, "A republic if you can keep it." This phrase, "a republic if you could keep it," is essential to the American system, because ultimately it shows it's up to us, the American people, that a republic requires a responsible citizenry. It requires vigilance, active participation, a commitment to the principles of limited government, accountability, and the rule of law. The founders understood that what they created wasn't perfect, but they also understood that they could talk all they want. They're not going to get anything better. And so accountability within the system has to be essential. You cannot have a bureaucracy that subverts leadership. So as we look at the challenges facing President Trump and his administration, it's clear that reining in this out-of-control bureaucracy isn't just a matter of political necessity. It's about America's survival. It's about preserving the foundations of our republic. And I want to talk more about that when we get back from this quick break, because the founders gave us a blueprint for governance that prioritizes freedom and liberty. They gave us a government that has balance. They understood human nature. They understood that naturally human beings are flawed. And so they tried to build a system to prevent the concentration of power. Now, we either honor their vision and demand a government that operates within its constitutional boundaries that the founders carefully crafted, or we ignore it. But I could assure you, if we ignore it, what comes next is going to be far worse. I want to talk about how Congress has abdicated their responsibility and how past chief executives, past presidents have ceded power and authority to the bureaucracy, how they've failed to exert their executive authority over it, and what the Trump administration must do in order to reverse this trend. I want to explore how we got to the point where unelected bureaucrats operate with impunity, where they believe they are above Congress and the executive authority, the President of the United States. And to understand the rise of this unaccountable bureaucracy, we need to examine two key failures. First is Congress's abdication of its oversight responsibilities. That's the first thing. The second thing is the presidents that ceded their authority to the administrative state. See, the founders, they envisioned Congress as the primary branch of government. And if you look at Congress, it has the most checks within the system. The founding fathers wanted power to be in the hands of the many as opposed to the few. So Congress is empowered to legislate, conduct oversight, hold the executive departments and agencies accountable. But over the last few decades, Congress abandoned this. Sure, they'll hold public hearings for a show, but that's about it. They've allowed these agencies to grow unchecked. They have allowed the abuses of power to go unpunished. I mean, take, for example, the revelations about multiple intelligence agencies within our government, the alphabet agencies, that have openly spied on the American people. You have the NSA's mass data collection programs to the Postal Service's ICOP program. And it shows you how deeply embedded surveillance practices have become, that they even infiltrated the Postal Service. I mean, you're supposed to deliver the mail, not spy on Americans. These programs operate with no meaningful oversight from Congress, and they blatantly violate the privacy of millions of Americans. Again, Congress has held hearings on some of these abuses. They feigned outrage, but no reform has followed. I mean, the bureaucracy continues to do what it does. It's largely undeterred because they know there are no consequences. I mean, just think how the CIA was caught spying on sitting members of the United States Senate Intelligence Committee. And I constantly bring this up because it's so important. In 2014, you had the CIA illegally access the computers of Senate staffers that were investigating the CIA's interrogation practices. Now think about that for a moment. You have an intelligence agency spying on the very lawmakers that are tasked with overseeing it. And this should have led to immediate consequences. Brennan should be in jail for this. There should have been firings and prosecutions. What happened? Well, nothing. The CIA leadership faced no penalties whatsoever. And while they feigned outrage, the scandal was swept under the rug. You had Chuck Schumer warning, they got 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. And it's because the bureaucrats have no fear. They have no fear of those that have the oversight responsibilities. And it's not just about spying on we the people or duly elected members of Congress. It goes to the very top. I mean, look at Crossfire Hurricane and that investigation where the FBI went and probed the campaign of Donald Trump in 2016. Okay, this idea of Russian collusion, there was no evidence to support collusion. Yet the investigation continued for years, including when President Trump became president. It undermined public trust. It handcuffed the 45th president, tore this country apart. And it was revealed that officials knew early on that there was no credible evidence to justify this probe, but they didn't care. And that's the key. They didn't care. They believed the American people made a mistake in 2016. And so as these self-anointed guardians of democracy, they had to swing into action. They had to try to correct what they deemed was the American people getting it wrong. But they don't have that right to do that. And it wasn't just a failure of oversight. It was a gross abuse of power, one of the worst in American history, yet again. Those responsible, they didn't face any real accountability. They got million-dollar book deals. They go on CNN and MSNBC. And congressional action is a recurring theme. Our lawmakers, they make these fiery speeches against the abuses of power. They launch the investigations. They hold the hearings. And nothing changes. They rarely take the next step and actually penalize or sanction the agencies for abusing their power. They don't issue criminal referrals to the Department of Justice. And so the bureaucracy has learned that it can act with impunity because there aren't consequences for any type of wrongdoing. Imagine what would happen if Congress issued criminal referrals, and with that criminal referral, they froze the funding of the Department of Justice until the Attorney General brought charges against those that abuse their power. Do you think that the overzealous bureaucrats would think twice before they abuse their power anymore? That's how you introduce accountability in the system. But I don't want to make it like it's just Congress's fault, because presidents have failed too. Presidents have ceded significant authority to the bureaucracy over the years. And part of it is convenience. Part of it is a lack of political will. Part of it is because they are ideologically in sync. Now, if you look at the explosion of administrative rulemaking, no legislation, agencies just create regulations that carry the force of law, no input from any elected officials. This is a process that has allowed the bureaucracy to grow in power and shield it from any type of direct accountability. You have the Obama administration's use of executive agencies to implement policies when he couldn't get things through Congress. You know, when Congress failed to pass cap and trade, okay, well, the EPA is just going to slap on more regulations, even though it's not in their charter, even though it was never authorized to do so. But they're going to impose sweeping regulations on carbon emissions because they know better. We saw the same thing with DACA. You know, Congress couldn't get together and figure out immigration reform. So you have the Department of Homeland Security and the Obama administration issuing, permanent visas to DACA recipients. You have the Department of Education that continually bypasses Congress when it comes to Title IX and things of that nature. You had President Biden, just completely ignore a Supreme Court order and issue forgiveness of student loans. And even the Trump administration, despite the drain the swamp mantra, you had Trump, who struggled to rein in the bureaucracy his first time around because the entrenched nature of the administrative state was difficult. They obstructed. They slowed down his agenda. You have the career officials within the agencies who would constantly undermine the administration any chance they got. You had President Trump declassifying all the Russian collusion documents. Well, where are they? Why haven't we seen them? He wanted the JFK files out, and yet he held them back. Well, why is that? Let's hope we get to see those files now. Then you have the lawfare that's going on, where our government has been politically weaponized, the judiciary, that has enabled these tactics. And so the result is a federal government that's out of control, where unelected officials wield more power than those that we put in office, without any fear that they're going to be held responsible. And when the wrongdoing is exposed, whether it's spying on Americans, misleading Congress, targeting political opponents, the bureaucrats get away with it. And that's the problem. For the last 4 years, we had a president in name only. Biden was non-functional. And yet the bureaucracy attempted to conceal the obvious cognitive decline. And they got away with it. It was the bureaucracy, the nameless, faceless bureaucrats who didn't receive a single vote by we the people. They were the ones making all the decisions. And this culture has to come to an end. Bureaucrats, they need to be reminded who really wields power in this country. And it's we the people through our elected representatives. We have to exert our influence over the system. If Congress and the presidency are to reclaim their rightful roles, they have to act decisively. Congress has to reassert its oversight powers, not just through investigations and talk, but by imposing real consequences on any agency, any individual that's involved in abusing their authority. Presidents have to stop ceding power to the bureaucracy. They need to serve as the chief executive officers that they were elected to serve as. They have to hold government bureaucrats accountable. The founding fathers warned against unchecked power for a reason. And James Madison in Federalist 47 warned that the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judicial, in the very same hands, whether it's one, a few, or many, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Tyranny of the bureaucracy is what we're seeing. And if we want to preserve our republic, the trend has to be reversed. You have the rise of an unaccountable bureaucracy. It's one of the gravest threats to the principles of limited government, of free societies. It's a threat to our republic. And in this final segment, I want to focus on the solutions, right? Because that's what we need. We need solutions to the problems, concrete steps that President Trump can take to reassert control over the bureaucracy, concrete steps of what Congress has to do to restore its oversight authority. And I want to start with the executive branch because President Trump is uniquely positioned to take immediate and impactful action to rein in the administrative state, to destroy the administrative state. As I said at the beginning, he is the only one with the cojones and the personality to actually do it. And the Constitution vests executive power in the president, meaning he has both the authority and the responsibility to ensure that the bureaucracy operates within its constitutional boundaries. Now, what can the president do? Well, there's numerous steps the president can take. First of all, we have to reform civil service protections. This is one of the biggest obstacles to accountability within the federal government and the difficulty in firing career bureaucrats. He already issued a couple executive orders, but he needs to go further. President Trump has to push for reforms to civil service protections, make it easier to remove any employee who fails to perform their mission. Any employee who puts their political ideology first and allows their political ideology to infect their job. You know, during the first term, Trump issued Executive Order 13957, and he sought to reclassify federal positions to make it easier to hold these employees accountable. Now, this order was rescinded under Biden. President Trump just brought it back, which is good, and it serves as a blueprint for similar actions moving forward. We also have to streamline the chain of command. The federal government is too bloated, okay? You have layers of middle management, no real leadership, slowing decisions, obscuring accountability. We need to restructure agencies and consolidate authority so that the leadership is more directly accountable for the agency's failures and abuses. We have to make sure that the people that are being put in charge understand that they serve us, not the other way around. And that's why I call to move agencies and departments outside of Washington, D.C. Moving the federal agencies outside of Washington, D.C. is certainly a bold and effective way to drain the swamp. You are decentralizing power. You're disrupting the entrenched bureaucratic culture. You know, when you relocate agencies to other parts of the country, it's going to force a lot of these swamp rats to resign because these are some of the most pretentious people who love the D.C. power center. And they won't want to work for these agencies if they have to go to middle America. And this would open the door to fresh talent that better reflects the American people. And it's a move that brings the government closer to the people it serves. You get away from the groupthink mentality that thrives in the Washington, D.C. bubble. And it's a win-win-win across the board because the decentralization is also going to stimulate local economies, spread opportunities in states that desperately need it. And most importantly, it actually breaks the monopoly of power that's concentrated in Washington, D.C. So I think moving agencies outside of D.C. is a great idea. I also believe that you have to cut the red tape. President Trump made significant progress in his first term, reducing the regulatory burdens of the bureaucratic state, the 2-for-1 rule. For every one new regulation, you have to eliminate 2. Okay, he needs to build on this success. He has to further limit the scope of administrative rulemaking and require stricter congressional oversight for any type of major regulatory actions. So those are the steps President Trump can immediately take. And while the president can take those steps, Congress has a vital role to play as well. It's Congress's job to legislate. It's Congress's job to appropriate funding. And it's Congress's job to provide oversight. So Congress needs to reclaim its authority. And one of the first things it can do is pass the REINS Act, the regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act. This would require Congress to approve any major regulation before it could take effect. This would put a significant check on the bureaucracy's ability to create rules without congressional input. It restores the balance of power between Congress and the executive branch. The REINS Act needs to be passed immediately. We also need to enforce budgetary consequences, right? So if Congress has the power of the purse, and it's time that they actually use it effectively, lawmakers have to impose budgetary penalties on agencies that overstep their boundaries, on agencies that fail to comply with congressional requirements. If an agency engages in illegal surveillance or defies congressional subpoena, cut its funding. That's it. You cut its funding until it surrenders to Congress's will. It's not just about accountability, it's about prevention. We have to remove the tools that have allowed the bureaucracy to thrive. Another thing we need to do is look at the missions, right? We need to eliminate the intelligence component from the FBI, where much of the abuses have happened over the last several years. The FBI was created as a law enforcement agency. That should be its sole function. That's it. So we have to get back to the original missions. We have to strengthen whistleblower protections. You know, whistleblowers play a crucial role in exposing corruption and the abuses of power within government. And when you have whistleblowers like Garrett Boyle, Marcus Allen, Steve Friend, Gary Shapley, Joseph Ziegler, they need to be protected, not punished for exposing the abuses of power, for exposing the corruption. And so Congress needs to strengthen the whistleblower protections, and they need to encourage more federal employees to come forward with any type of evidence of wrongdoing. You have to provide this layer of accountability. And members of Congress need to stop using whistleblowers as political props, as photo ops for their investigations. Because what they do is now they'll bring them out, put them in front of everyone, but once the cameras are turned off, they forget about these whistleblowers. That's unacceptable. Congress needs to do their job. And they have to go beyond holding hearings and issuing reports. Everyone's tired of the white papers and the reports. Lawmakers need to impose real consequences. Subpoenas with teeth, contempt citations, penalties for noncompliance. Hold individuals accountable for misconduct. Not issue vague reprimands to the agencies, not fake outrage. We have to reform the administrative state. We have to reform the Administrative Procedures Act. How agencies create and enforce regulations. Okay, this was originally intended to ensure transparency and fairness, but it's been exploited. It's been exploited and abused to expand bureaucratic power. And so Congress needs to limit the scope of the agencies and their rulemaking capabilities. They need to require congressional authorization for any type of expansion. They have to approve it. Most importantly, we have to change the culture within the bureaucracy. A cultural shift within the federal mindset. Bureaucrats need to be reminded that they exist to serve the American people, not impose their own agendas, not act as a shadow government that nobody wanted. And this requires messaging from both the President of the United States and Congress. It also requires tangible consequences for those who defy their constitutional responsibilities. That's how you clean up the swamp. And we have to have an unwavering commitment to the principles of accountability and limited government. So President Trump's second term presents a unique opportunity to confront these issues head on and kill off the administrative state once and for all. But success requires bold leadership. It requires cooperation with Congress. It requires the support of the American people. The bureaucracy may be a powerful force, but it is not invincible. And with the right reforms, we can restore a government that truly serves us, we the people. Now, if you found the content of this episode informative, make sure to give the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating. Take 30 seconds to write a review on any podcast platform that allows it, including Apple and Spotify. Make sure you share this episode with others. Subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And I want to thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me. Let's be optimistic about where we're going to go in these next 4 years. I do have hope that we're going to begin to make the reforms necessary to restore the principles that the Founding Fathers understood were so important. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back next week with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.